Man rescues snared bear. The heartwarming twist you'll never forget. The forest stood still, wrapped in a thick morning mist, as if the world had forgotten time itself. The soft rustling of leaves and the distant call of a bird were the only sounds breaking the silence. The towering trees, their branches interwoven like an ancient tapestry, whispered tales of centuries gone by. The air felt heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles. It was a peaceful, tranquil world, one that felt as if it existed outside the chaos of modern life. But the calm was deceptive. Beneath the serene beauty of the forest, there was an unease, a tension that tugged at the edges of this perfect landscape. Something was wrong. A distant cry pierced through the silence. It was jagged, a raw, animal sound full of pain and desperation, echoing through the trees. The kind of cry that pulled at the soul, demanding attention. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Ethan, a seasoned wildlife enthusiast, had spent most of his life immersed in the forests. With each step he took, the crunch of leaves under his boots was the only sign of his presence. His eyes, sharp with years of experience, scanned the forest as he moved, always alert for signs of trouble. He had been patrolling this area for years, ensuring that poachers stayed out and wildlife thrived in peace. But today the air felt different. Something gnawed at him, a feeling that the quiet calm of the woods was an illusion. The sound grew louder. Ethan quickened his pace, his senses now heightened. His every step felt deliberate, as if he knew he was getting closer to something significant. Yet he couldn't shake the growing sense of dread that clawed at him. He paused, listening closely, trying to pinpoint the source of the noise. The cries, they were unmistakable. A bear. And it was in agony. Ethan's breath hitched as he followed the sound deeper into the forest. The forest, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now seemed dark and suffocating, its thick trees pressing in on him. The cries grew louder, more frantic, each one filled with an unmistakable urgency. His heart pounded in his chest as he pushed through the underbrush, his boots slipping on the wet ground. Then he saw it. At first, it was just a dark shape among the trees, struggling, its movements erratic and desperate. But as he stepped closer, the scene became tragically clear. A massive bear, caught in a cruel poacher's snare, lay sprawled on the forest floor. Its powerful body, usually a symbol of wild strength, was now broken and vulnerable. One of its legs was tightly ensnared by the wire, the jagged metal digging deep into its flesh. The bear's once sharp eyes now flickered with pain and fear, its labored breathing shallow and uneven. Ethan froze. The sight before him was nothing short of heartbreaking. The bear's fur, once thick and glossy, was matted with blood, and its raw, animalistic cries filled the air, shaking the very core of his being. The snare had done its damage. The bear, once a king of the forest, now lay helpless, caught in the trap of human greed. Ethan knew the risks. Approaching an injured wild animal, especially a bear, was dangerous, especially when the animal was in such pain. Its survival instincts would be on high alert, and in its frantic state it could lash out violently. But Ethan couldn't turn away. His gaze locked with the bear's, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The animal's eyes were full of fear, but also something else. A silent plea. The struggle for survival. Ethan felt a pang of guilt. He had spent years protecting animals from harm, but here, in this moment, he faced an impossible choice. He knew leaving the bear like this would be a death sentence. But the bear could easily turn on him. The snare was twisted and cruel, and he would need to get close, very close, to free it. Yet, his heart told him this wasn't just about saving an animal. It was about something much bigger. He couldn't leave the forest without trying. His legs felt heavy, but he forced himself forward, the weight of the situation pressing on his shoulders. He couldn't allow the forest to lose another life. Not this life. Not the bear. Ethan's hands trembled as he stepped closer to the bear, the weight of the moment pressing down on him with every step. His breath caught in his throat, and his mind raced with 100 different thoughts. This is dangerous. One wrong move and the bear could lash out, could kill me. But I can't leave it like this. Not after what it's been through. The bear's eyes were locked on his, a mix of distrust and pain in them. It was obvious the animal was terrified. Ethan spoke softly, trying to calm the bear. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." His voice was low, soothing, but his heart hammered in his chest. The air between them seemed to hum with tension as the bear shifted slightly, its body taut with anticipation. Ethan knew he had to be careful. One wrong move could make the situation worse. He took a slow step forward, extending his hand slightly in a gesture of peace, as if showing the bear he meant no harm. It was an agonizing wait, but the bear seemed to sense his intent, its movements slightly less erratic, though it was still clearly in immense pain. Ethan's pulse quickened as he knelt down, keeping his gaze steady but gentle. The bear was caught in the snare's grip, its leg twisted at an unnatural angle, blood staining the ground beneath it. This wasn't just an ordinary rescue mission. This was a gamble. If he wasn't careful, the bear's powerful instincts could kick in, and Ethan could end up as the one in danger. Yet there was no turning back now. Ethan had made his choice, and he would see it through no matter the cost. The snare was a cruel piece of craftsmanship, designed with one goal in mind: to trap and torment the animal until it could no longer fight back. The wire was thick, wound tightly around the bear's leg, cutting into its flesh. Ethan could see the severity of the injury. The leg was already swollen and bruised, and the blood was seeping from the wound. The pain was evident in the bear's eyes, yet it seemed to understand that Ethan was here to help. There was an unspoken understanding, a fragile connection forming between them. Ethan moved cautiously, aware that every action had to be precise. He pulled out a small pocket knife from his bag and began to carefully cut through the snare, each movement deliberate and focused. The wire was tough, and every twist felt like it fought back against him, almost as if the trap itself didn't want to give up its grip on the bear. Sweat beaded on Ethan's forehead, the intensity of the moment growing. The bear, though still in pain, remained relatively calm, its breathing ragged but controlled. Ethan spoke to it softly again, his voice low and steady, offering comfort where he could. "I'm almost there. Just hold on a little longer." His voice was steady, but inside, his thoughts were a chaotic storm of fear and determination. He could hear the crunch of the wire as he finally managed to cut through one of the loops. But the snare was still firmly attached, and with a swift motion, the bear tugged its leg, making Ethan wince. The animal's body jerked, and for a moment, Ethan feared it might lash out, but he held his ground. His fingers worked faster now, cutting the last of the wire, the snare giving way to his persistence. He felt a rush of relief as he freed the bear's leg from its painful confines. But the job was far from over. The bear, though free from the trap, was still in a vulnerable state. With one final tug, the snare fell away, clattering to the ground in a heap of twisted metal. The bear's leg was free. Ethan took a step back, his heart racing, a mix of exhaustion and triumph flooding through him. The bear collapsed onto the forest floor, too weak to stand but no longer trapped. Ethan could see the bear's chest rise and fall in shallow breaths, its body trembling from both the physical strain and the emotional turmoil of the moment. For a moment, they simply sat there, locked in an intense silence. The forest, which had been filled with the cries of pain just moments before, was now eerily quiet. The bear's eyes, once full of fear and agony, softened, a flicker of something else, something more tender, passing between them. Ethan took a deep breath, looking down at the animal. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The bear had been freed from its snare, and now, all he could do was wait and hope it would survive the injury. As he reached into his bag for a first aid kit, the bear shifted slightly, its gaze still fixed on him, silently acknowledging the bond they had forged. In that moment, Ethan knew that he had done something extraordinary, not just for the bear, but for the forest itself. The battle was won, but the real journey was only just beginning. Ethan took a cautious step back, allowing the bear some space. His pulse was still racing from the intense rescue, but the feeling of relief began to sink in. The snare was gone, The bear was free. Yet, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was different now. The bear, its leg raw and battered, lay on the forest floor, its breathing labored, but its wild eyes no longer held the same fear and suspicion. There was something softer in them, a recognition, a flicker of trust. For a few moments, nothing moved. The bear was still and silent, as if processing what had just happened. Ethan stood still too, watching, waiting. He didn't know if the bear would run, attack, or simply retreat into the forest. He knew wild animals were unpredictable, especially when injured and vulnerable. But as Ethan lowered himself to the ground, preparing to tend to the bear's wound with the first aid kit, the bear's gaze met his. A heavy silence hung in the air, and in that silence, Ethan saw something that took him by surprise. The bear wasn't just looking at him with pain, but with something else. Gratitude? He couldn't be sure, but there was a softness in its eyes that seemed to speak volumes, an unspoken acknowledgement of the bond that was starting to form between them. The bear had been through unimaginable pain, and yet, here it was, looking at him with something beyond suspicion or fear. Ethan slowly opened the first aid kit, his movements gentle, as though he didn't want to disturb the fragile moment. He gathered some antiseptic wipes, gauze, and a bandage, all while keeping his eyes on the bear. His hands were steady now, the tension in his body slowly easing as he worked. He knew it wasn't much. He wasn't a veterinarian, but he was doing what he could to make the bear as comfortable as possible. As Ethan carefully cleaned the wound, the bear didn't growl or flinch. Instead, it watched him intently, its gaze unwavering. The trust was forming in that small, quiet exchange. Ethan was no longer just a man in the forest. He was someone the bear had begun to see as a source of help, of safety, a connection beyond the wildness of the woods. And in that moment, Ethan realized that this was more than just saving an animal. It was the beginning of an unlikely bond that neither of them could have predicted. After tending to the bear's injury, Ethan sat back on his heels, a small sigh escaping his lips. The bear, though still too weak to move, was no longer thrashing in pain. It lay quietly, its eyes following his every movement. It was as though the bear understood that Ethan had done everything he could to ease its suffering. There was no animosity, no instinct to flee, just a silent acknowledgement, a recognition of a shared understanding. Ethan knew the road to recovery would be long for the bear. Its leg was badly injured, and the pain was still evident in the way it shifted uncomfortably. But there was something in its posture now that spoke of a deeper connection. It wasn't just an animal anymore, an object of fear or curiosity. It had become something else to Ethan. It had become a symbol of resilience, of the bond that could form between humans and nature when compassion was at the heart of every action. Days passed, and Ethan returned to the forest every morning, checking on the bear from a distance, not wanting to intrude too much on its healing process. Each time he saw the bear, it seemed a little stronger. It moved more freely, its limp less pronounced with each passing day. And each time their eyes met, the bond between them grew stronger. The bear no longer viewed Ethan as a stranger in its world. It recognized him as someone who had risked everything to offer help. In return, the bear had given something invaluable, a trust that, for a wild animal, was no small gift. Ethan felt that trust like a weight in his chest. It reminded him of the unspoken language that existed between all creatures, a language that transcended words and borders, rooted in the simple act of kindness. And as Ethan watched the bear slowly regain its strength, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. This wasn't just about him saving the bear. It was about something far bigger, a relationship formed in the wild, born of mutual respect, healing, and trust. It was a bond that neither of them had expected, but one that had changed them both forever. Days passed, and the memories of the rescue slowly faded into a routine. Ethan continued his patrols, keeping an eye on the wildlife in the area, but there was always a part of him that thought of the bear, the wild creature he had saved, now recovering somewhere deep in the forest. There was a strange sense of fulfillment in knowing that the bear was alive, free, and healing, but it also left Ethan with a lingering curiosity. Would he ever see the bear again? Would it simply disappear back into the wilderness, its debt repaid in some unspoken way? One late afternoon, as Ethan was making his way through the woods, he was struck by an odd feeling, a sense that something was watching him. The wind had died down, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. The trees stood still, almost eerily so. His instincts kicked in, and he froze, scanning his surroundings. It wasn't until he heard a rustling from the bushes to his left that he tensed up. His hand instinctively went to the knife at his belt, but as the rustling grew louder, he realized it wasn't a predator or a threat. It was the bear. The creature emerged from the underbrush, its once injured leg now showing signs of healing. The bear moved with a newfound confidence, its powerful frame cutting through the undergrowth with ease. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. There, standing before him, was the very animal he had saved. But it wasn't alone. The bear was guiding a path through the forest, and Ethan couldn't help but follow, intrigued. He kept his distance, not wanting to spook the bear, but curious about what it was doing. The bear stopped at a small clearing, then turned and looked back at Ethan. Its eyes were no longer filled with suspicion. There was a calm assurance in them, as if it was waiting for him to catch up. Ethan stepped forward slowly, unsure of what he might find next. He followed the bear through the trees, the forest feeling more alive than ever, as if the very air hummed with anticipation. Eventually, the bear led Ethan to a secluded part of the forest, one he had never ventured to before. Hidden in the thick underbrush, partially covered by vines and debris, was an old, rusted metal crate. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight. There was something undeniably wrong about it. The bear stepped forward and nudged the crate with its snout, revealing its contents. Inside were piles of stolen wildlife items: fur, tusks, feathers, poached treasures, evidence of the illegal activities that had plagued this region for years. Ethan felt his heart race as he realized the weight of what was happening. The bear had led him straight to the poacher's secret stash. It dawned on Ethan that this wasn't just a simple encounter. The bear wasn't just offering gratitude. It was leading him to a greater purpose. This bear, who had been a victim of the poacher's traps, had come back, not just to thank Ethan, but to help him stop the men who had caused its pain. The bear, it seemed, had become an unexpected ally in the fight against wildlife exploitation. Ethan's hands trembled as he surveyed the stolen goods. His mind raced. This was the proof the authorities needed to finally put an end to the poaching ring that had terrorized this part of the forest. And the bear had found it. Ethan wasted no time. He knew the importance of the moment. The poacher's operation had been exposed, and this was the break he needed. He quickly made the call to the local authorities, reporting the hidden stash and the location of the poachers. But he knew this wasn't going to be easy. The poachers wouldn't just give up. They were dangerous men, and they would stop at nothing to protect their illegal operation. As Ethan waited for the authorities to arrive, he kept a watchful eye on the forest. The bear, standing beside him, seemed calm, as though it too knew the significance of what they had just uncovered. It had not only freed itself from the poacher's grip, but had now played a pivotal role in bringing them down. Together, man and animal had turned the tables. When the authorities finally arrived, the poachers were caught off guard. They had no idea that the very animal they had once trapped had become a silent accomplice in Ethan's mission. Within hours, the poachers were arrested, and their illegal operation was dismantled. The forest was finally free from their harm, thanks to the unexpected alliance between Ethan and the bear. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the forest, Ethan stood beside the bear, watching as the authorities cleaned up the site. He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of awe and gratitude. This was no ordinary day. It was a day when one act of kindness, one simple rescue, had set in motion a chain of events that would change the course of the forest's future. The bear, once a victim, had become a hero in its own right, a protector of its home, an ally in the fight for the protection of wildlife. And Ethan, who had simply sought to save a life, had found himself in the midst of a story that no one could have predicted. It was a story of courage, of nature's resilience, and of the power of one act of compassion to spark a revolution of change. With the poachers arrested and their operation destroyed, the forest began to breathe again. The quiet hum of nature returned, no longer drowned out by the fear of human greed. The trees swayed gently in the wind, the rustling of leaves now a sound of peace rather than tension. The animals that had once been hunted or trapped slowly returned to their natural rhythms, their presence once again a testament to the untouched beauty of this wilderness. The authorities worked tirelessly to dismantle the poachers' networks, uncovering hidden traps and illegal hunting grounds. The evidence provided by the bear, alongside Ethan's courageous actions, had led to the unraveling of the entire operation. What had once been a territory marred by violence and exploitation had now become a place of hope, its future brighter than it had been in years. Ethan continued his patrols, but now they felt different. The forest felt different. It wasn't just the absence of poaching, but the presence of something else, something intangible but powerful. A connection had been forged, a bond that transcended species, built on a foundation of trust, compassion, and shared purpose. The bear, though not seen every day, had become a symbol of that change. Ethan often thought of the creature, wondering if it was still out there, healing, thriving, roaming free. He held on to the belief that the forest had become a safer place not just because the poachers were gone, but because something greater had come into play. The unspoken bond between man and the wild, a bond that was capable of changing everything. One evening, as Ethan sat on a log near the edge of the forest, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he reflected on everything that had happened. He thought about that first moment when he had heard the bear's cries, how everything in him had screamed to turn away, to leave the wild to its own fate. But he hadn't. Instead, he had followed the sound, knowing that he had the power to help, knowing that in that moment, he was the one who could make a difference. That decision had changed the course of his life. Not only had he saved an animal, but he had gained something far greater, a deep understanding of the bond between humans and nature. He had seen firsthand how one act of kindness could alter the future in ways he had never imagined. He had learned that courage was not just about facing danger, but about acting in the face of uncertainty, even when the outcome was unknown. And most of all, he had learned that sometimes, the wild had its own way of showing gratitude, and that gratitude could be a force to be reckoned with. As the last rays of light flickered across the forest floor, Ethan stood up, feeling the weight of his journey settle into his bones. He knew he would never be the same after this experience. The forest had become his home in a way it never had before. The animals were no longer just creatures he protected. They were allies, partners in a shared mission to protect the earth. And the bear, that once trapped soul, would forever remain a reminder of the extraordinary power of compassion and the unforeseen paths that one's selfless act could create. He glanced one last time into the woods, and as if on cue, a familiar rustle stirred in the trees. Ethan smiled softly, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. In the heart of the forest, where man and animal had come together, there was no longer any division. They were all part of the same story now, each of them playing a role in the preservation of the wild. With that thought in his heart, Ethan walked off into the twilight, knowing that this was only the beginning of a journey that would forever change him, and the forest, forever. As the final moments of Ethan's journey echo through the stillness of the forest, there's a powerful message that remains with you, the viewer. This isn't just a story about saving an animal. It's a call to action, a reminder of our responsibility to protect the wild spaces and creatures we often take for granted. The bond between man and nature is fragile, and it's up to us to ensure it's one built on respect, compassion, and understanding. Ethan's experience proves that a single act of kindness can ripple through time, creating change far greater than we can ever imagine. By stepping in, by caring, by choosing to make a difference, we have the power to alter the fate of the world around us. The bear, once trapped and suffering, became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always a chance for redemption. And that's something worth fighting for. Now, as you watch the final moments of this story, think about your own connection with the world around you. What can you do to protect wildlife? What small act can you take to make sure the world remains a place where animals can roam free, where forests stand tall, and where nature's delicate balance isn't destroyed by greed? We all have a role to play in this, just like Ethan. And just like the bear, you too have the power to make a difference. Whether it's spreading awareness about the dangers of poaching, supporting wildlife conservation, or simply being mindful of how we impact the planet, every action counts. If you feel inspired by this story, share it with your friends and family. Let them know that together, we can create a better future for wildlife and nature. Encourage them to take action, too, because the more people who join in, the more powerful our collective impact becomes. Imagine, just for a moment, being the bear trapped in that snare. Feeling the pain, the fear, the hopelessness. But then someone like Ethan comes along. Someone who chooses to act, to make a difference. And because of that selfless act, your world is changed forever. Now, think about how you can be the person who makes that difference for the creatures and ecosystems around you. Your compassion, your kindness, your courage. These things have the power to transform lives, just as Ethan's did for that bear. So what will you do? Will you stand by, or will you step up and make a change? The time is now, and the world is waiting for you to answer the call. Take that first step. Be the change. Protect the wild.